If you want to grow and scale a landscape company, it's a very different model from growing and scaling an Amazon business. And that was kind of like where the crossroads was for me as I was looking down the pipeline for the landscape company. It was like, I could go buy more trucks, go get more people, go hire some salesmen, blah, 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 which just sounded not like a fun business to run.
Hello and welcome to the Wholesale Made Easy podcast, where we believe selling on Amazon shouldn't be hard, and we're going to prove it. My name is Dylan Carter, and I'm one of the co-founders at VinDrive, a tool that helps Amazon wholesale sellers streamline their businesses, stay organized, and land more profitable accounts. I'm sitting down with other successful wholesale sellers, and together we're sharing lessons learned and what it really takes to succeed with wholesale. Today's guest is Paul of FBA Insiders, where a team of experts supply leads and knowledge to help retail and online arbitrage sellers scale their businesses as quickly as possible. Now, of course, this is a wholesale podcast, so we'll be focusing in on Paul's experience with growing his wholesale business by building a team of virtual assistants and strategically using net terms to scale. Paul has been selling on Amazon for 4 years, 3 of which he's been full-time. So I'm very excited to sit down with Paul and dive into some amazing wholesale growth tactics. So without further ado, let's get to the episode. All right, Paul. So when did you first get started selling?
Ooh, that was 2000 and it's like it was about 5 years ago, 2014.
So it's been a little while.
Yeah, a few years.
So what got you interested initially in selling like on Amazon? Did you come from like a lot of people do from the eBay world and transition into wholesale? Or were you like, hey, I'm brand new to selling online, let's go the Amazon route?
I was brand new. So I had a landscape company that was grueling work. I mean, I enjoyed it. I like being out in the sun and stuff. But my wife got pregnant with our first kid. And one of my buddies was like, hey, there's this Amazon thing. And my introduction was like going to a Target and hustling it out and then quickly transitioned into wholesale. But so I learned about Amazon through just out of like really necessity. I was like at that point in my life where I wanted to find a job that I could do from home. And Amazon FBA was that answer. So yeah, I was brand new, but I was always like a little squirrely, I was like always looking for the next thing that would be more profitable than what I was currently doing and more enjoyable. And so, Amazon was the means to that end, to be able to, like when my kid was born, I basically had 9 months from the moment that I found out my wife was pregnant to now I have to hustle to try to come home. And I remember it was right after Q4 my kid was born December 29th. I was able to take off 2 months. I didn't work an ounce for 2 months and was able to just like be with my kid. I say that's being facetious. I did work a little, but it was like a few hours a week,
So bare minimum kind of stuff. I mean, that's a big transition though.
Yeah. It was huge.
I've done landscaping. I remember my dad owned a landscaping company for a while, and so I would go help out. And yeah, it's certainly grueling, but it's long hours, right? It's early in the day, late at night sometimes. It's definitely grueling. So it's a nice, right. I'm sure, transition. Driving,
you're definitely, if you want to grow and scale a landscape company, it's a very different model from growing and scaling an Amazon business. And that was kind of like where the crossroads was for me as I was looking down the pipeline for the landscape company. It was like, I could go buy more trucks, go get more people, go hire some salesmen, blah, 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 which just sounded not like a fun business to run. Not that it can't be done, but and then I looked at Amazon and it was like, man, there's guys operating one-man show companies doing, $5 million a year. And it's like, oh, well, that sounds much more enjoyable.
Yeah, it's a little bit more scalable in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And, pretty straightforward, right? Like landscaping, I can't tell you how many jobs I did where I underbid the job just off of, things happen. And it's like, oh, well, I just did, 3 days of work and I barely made anything. And stuff can still, again, things can happen in every business, but Amazon, for the most part was pretty straightforward. I could look at all the data and pull the trigger on something. And it's like, that was a really, for sure way of knowing, mitigating the risk.
Yeah. Which is something, risk mitigation is like a major thing for us, right? Like we say it all the time, especially in the Facebook group. If you don't understand what risk mitigation is, deep dive. I mean, it is phenomenal, especially when you can build it into your operations, your systems. And you made a comment earlier that you were able to take basically 2 months and reduce your hours pretty dramatically, in my opinion, almost down to none. It's a little bit easier to do that. And we're going to talk about how you're able to do that with wholesale or just Amazon in general versus a landscaping company. So let's kind of transition into how you were able to, one, scale the business, but also be able to reduce or should I say, pull yourself out of the day-to-day kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, the wholesale operations, right? Like, how do you go from, I'm the $300 kid. I started with $300 to my wife did. She was like, "You're crazy," And so I took 300, turned it into 600, turned it into 12, and I just kept rolling it all back in, all while operating my landscape company. And then I got to this point where it's like, okay, there's enough capital where I can close the landscape company and do full-time FBA. And then there was that moment of, okay, now I don't want to be tied to this. So you really have two options, right? Like, you can hammer it out for several months, make a bunch of money, and then never work or not work, after, or things can keep ticking while you're gone. Right. And so, virtual assistants is really the answer to keeping things ticking while it's gone, and domestic workers too, obviously. So depending on the model of wholesale, some people are operating a business out of an apartment, right? They're not going to have pallets shipped to their house, right? So you can do everything with prep centers and virtual assistants. So my outsourcing started coming with, I lived in a residential area. I tried getting pallets shipped. It was really annoying. And so now I'm shipping stuff I started with one prep center, and I've stayed with that prep center. I've had a lot of people over the years ask me, "Oh, well, what do you think about this prep center and that prep center?" It's like, I got one guy. That's all I can, and there's a huge benefit to that, because my rate, I promise you, it's the lowest across the industry, like lower than I could probably even make it in my own warehouse. It's just like,
that's incredible.
Insane. Yeah. It's insanely low. And so, prep center was one thing, outsourcing all the shipping, no more physical inventory. And then the next thing is virtual assistants. And so the sourcing, right? So some things with wholesale, right? Like in the beginning, it's really just grinding it out, right? It's like, you got to sort through the list, you got to call the companies and all that. And so, if capital is tight, you might not need a virtual assistant. You might want one as an assistant for like slowly, like tracking things, watching your feedback, checking on your returns, just your basic maintenance. But then from a sourcing side, it's like, you really need a good bit of capital, I would say, to get a VA that's going to be doing, all of your sourcing for you. Because once you get the whole idea with wholesale is replens, right? Like, once you've got those replens and you can order $20,000 of product in 30 minutes if it's just, like clockwork. So, once you max all of that out, it's pretty simple. And another example, so I taught my sister how to do wholesale. She literally has one account, which isn't a lot of risk mitigation, but it's locked in. She's got some, basically the company closed off to all Amazon sellers. They're not accepting any more new accounts. And so she got in the window. And she sold 30 grand last month, and she raises 3 kids from home in North Carolina.
With one account.
With one account. One account.
That's why I keep saying, like, you're one wholesale account / supplier away. Like, I'm saying this for a reason. It's incredible.
Yeah. So, that's one thing that, like, I know there's a lot to having, the risk definitely gets mitigated. Like my sister's fear as well. What if they call me and they're like, "Hey, we're reducing our sellers from 50 to 10 and you didn't make the cut?" Like, that's a real risk. With that said, though, it's like, milk it for all it's worth, and I would say always continuing to go out and try to find new accounts, but the pressure isn't as heavy, right? So like the accounts you do have that are locked in, milk them for everything they got. Don't be afraid to make new listings. Don't be afraid to test new products, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, 100%. And it's a uncomfortable thing to do to get to that point where you have somebody who's solely responsible for sourcing for you, or you're completely handing off prepping to a prep center, especially if you've been doing it. Like, I was fortunate enough to where when I started the company and I transitioned to wholesale, I went ahead and decided I didn't want to touch it because I didn't have a lot of time. And I knew the time that would have been spent there would have been better spent sourcing, especially in that growing phase. And yeah, I knew I was going to pay a premium versus what it would have cost me to quote unquote do it. But at the same time, it was worth that effort, right? Because I gained time back. So it was still more profitable. But there's different, like, everybody knows that I'm a big like systems process kind of guy. There's different levels of doing this, right? So when we say like outsourcing or creating systems, that could just as easily be a prep center. It could just as easily be hiring somebody in your family to do sourcing for you. I mean, I can't tell you the amount of countless sellers that have their kids source for them over summer. Yeah. And they pay them for it. They're like, hey, I'll pay you $10 an hour. Go do it. And you're able to get to a point where the outcomes, so the revenue milestones you want to hit, are inevitable because that's just the outcome of the system you created. When you transitioned and you started hiring VAs, how did you find that process? Like, was it difficult? How did you structure that? What were some obstacles you had to overcome?
The first part of the question skipped. You said how something.
Yeah. So whenever you're getting started with the VA, how did you find that process? Like VA one, you're getting started with it.
Right.
How do you structure all that?
Yeah. So I used it was recommended to me onlinejobs.ph, and there's a bunch of different options out there for what to use to hire with. And so the first thing that I outsourced was finding new companies, and I call it the shotgun approach. I definitely think, and I think I've heard you say this, like, get on the phone with suppliers. Like, I think that is the way to go. The shotgun approach is just like, maybe store stocking, or maybe you do the trade show no show, and you just go on a trade show list and you just say, hey, virtual assistant, send this email to every single company and let's see what happens. And I've had that work, and out of 200 emails, you might get one account, maybe. And so I've done that approach. There's a lot of tracking involved. I know VenDrive helps with that tracking. And so there's a lot of great tools out there now. See, like, a few years ago, there wasn't as many automation tools, because you can either automate with two ways, right? Software and systems, or people, right? And so people, I try to go with the software first. If there's a gap and I need a person, then I go to the person. And so that was the first thing I outsourced, was the shotgun approach, and then I would, I'd definitely give lists and encourage them, hey, send emails here or there. And I would test things too, like in industries that I wasn't in, or niches I wasn't in. I would, instead of me taking all the time to call these people, I would just have them do it. Because their, dollar per hour was much less than my dollar per hour. That was probably one thing. And then the next thing was running through wholesale lists, which is, in my opinion, a much more profitable way to go. So if you can, maybe you're the one who goes out and gets the meat. Maybe you're the, you close the account, you get a list that comes through, there's 30,000 SKUs on it, and whatever tool you use to run through your lists, have your VA help you source that list, or VAs. And so at that point, it's just a machine, right? It's just product after product after product. They send you what they think is good, you vet it, you order it, test it, it does well, you reorder it.
Today's episode is brought to you by GoAura.com, our AI-based repricing tool. If you're ready to take your sales to the next level, repricing is the way to go. No more manually adjusting your prices each day. Let our AI actually do the heavy lifting for you. And if you're sick of repricing tools dropping their activity and leaving you in the dark, Aura can help. With smart repricing strategies, an optimized platform, and instant repricing, Aura both reprices faster and holds the buy box for 65% more time than competing repricers. If you're ready to experience repricing reimagined, head over to GoAura.com to start your 14-day free trial. Yeah, you're essentially creating like this assembly line of wholesale products, right?
It's a
And that's
machine, right?
yeah, exactly. And that's the way I like to view it because there's so many subsystems to that. So once you start placing restock orders, okay, now maybe you hand that product off to one VA who does nothing but listing optimization, and then maybe it goes to a PPC optimization VA, right? And so you just have this beautiful machine where everything just gets better over time and iteratively evolves in a beautiful manner, and you can start to step out further and further and further. Yeah, I remember testing having a VA one source and send the first email, and it worked pretty well. The hard part for me was it was high volume, so I was churning through a lot of leads. So that's why I like to call them. But what's cool is when you have a system to where you no longer do the sourcing, all you're doing is waking up and making phone calls.
Right.
That's kind of cool because now you have your CRM like a VinDrive.com where you just log in, work through that list, and move on. And the next morning, it's full again, right? So you have this
Right.
never-ending faucet of wholesale leads. So when people are like, "Oh, where do you get wholesale leads from?" It's like, no, you just create this beautiful, simple system,
Yeah.
and it's just good. It just churns it out, right? It's a repeatable system. That's cool. Yeah, we actually just hired a VA. This is my first time from onlinejobs.ph. I've been using Upwork and transitioned away. Just the quality is not exactly the same. So we're testing it now. We'll see how it goes. And this is something me and you talked about before we started recording is, does it always make sense to hire for the cheapest dollar amount, right?
Right.
And this is something
Yeah.
you were kind of talking about to me a bit.
And this is like if you've never hired a VA and you hear somebody say you can hire somebody for $3.50 an hour or $4 an hour, $5 an hour, whatever it is, and they're going to work for you 40 hours a week and blah blah blah. And it's like that just sounds too good to be true, almost like shameful to be like, I can't pay somebody that. Well, first off, different culture, different price. I've actually had VAs that were making $4 an hour, $5 an hour, and that's like a nurse's wage in the
Yeah.
Philippines.
I mean, you have
Right.
conversion
So,
rates.
right. So at any rate, online jobs, when I started out, I was like cheapest one with the best qualifications, and and I've had this happen numerous times where they start out with a punch, and I think we can all kind of attest to this. Like when we were young kids, we get this job, we're really enthusiastic. 2 months in, and then we're like, okay, boss isn't watching. I'm gonna take go eat an ice cream cone in the freezer, or whatever it is, wherever you work, and so it's understandably so that they're human. They start out with a punch, and then they peel back, and then you're left going, well, man, I hired you for this, but you're not performing well, and blah blah blah. And before you know it, you find yourself like just sifting through VAs one after another. Maybe every 3 to 6 months, it's like they drop off, they drop off, they drop off. And I think there's a lot to be said about one, engaging in the relationship with them. Like I've had some VAs drop off because there was like one of their friends passed away, and I didn't hear from them for like 2 weeks. Well, I didn't realize in their culture, like when something like that happens, it's like all things stop. At least for this person, it did. It was just like all things stop. They weren't responding to emails, messages, whatever. And it just was one of those things where we had to part ways. So again, I don't think we should ever look at the virtual assistant as this like they are a human, right? So it's like they have a life too. They've got like learning about paying for holidays, right? Like that was one thing that I researched, and we could actually post a link in the podcast about this, of like what holidays you should pay for, that like paid time off. Like there's letting them know, hey, I'm in this for the long haul if you are. And
Right.
and so one of the things that helps in the beginning, we were talking about this too, is to people will say, okay, well, I never hired a VA, how do I pay them, and how do I make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing? So the source that I use for like transferring the funds is called Veem, VEEM.com. It's a great little tool. It's kind of like, I think it's actually, I want to say it's owned by PayPal, but don't quote me on that. And then there's Hubstaff, Hubstaff.com, and that's for tracking. So what Hubstaff does is it actually does take screenshots every so many minutes of their computer screen as they're working. And the way that I pitch this, because a lot of people think it's like a mistrust issue, and to an extent, I think it kind of is, if we can be fair, of like, they're just starting to work for you. I mean, hey, if you go into any American business, I promise you there's cameras on every square inch of that building for a good reason. There's a camera over the cash register, right? And it's the same thing with this, but the way that I tell my VAs is, I want to make sure that what I taught you to do is actually happening. That like you're not, that there was no miscommunication there, which is, communication is huge. Depending on the English of the individual you're speaking to. So making sure that they're doing it right. If there's any more efficient way they could be doing it, maybe they're clicking on things they shouldn't be, or looking at data that they don't need to be. Or maybe they're just like really slow at digesting the data. You would want to know that. Like, how fast can you churn through product after product after product? You want them to be quick. So there's all types of reasons why you would want to see those screenshots. And then there's also like a mouse activity thing of like, my VAs that work really well on Hubstaff, they're like moving their mouse or touching their keyboard 80 to 90% of the time. My VAs that I've let go, we're doing it like 12% of the time, right?
Oh, wow.
So, it's like, well, and then the proof is in the pudding, right? There is no qualm of like, well, I think they aren't really performing well, so I'm going to let them go. Like, no, I have the results to show they aren't performing well, and here's why. They were watching a YouTube video for 3 hours, and it's all screenshot, and they clock the work, So that's the type of stuff. But I think what my long-term goal with VAs is to get them off of the time tracker, right? Like, we still have to know how much you've worked, but I don't necessarily need to see your screen.
Yeah.
Like I've got a VA right now that I'd give my credit card to, that she's just really that good. And that's the ultimate trust, right? Of giving somebody your money to say, here, go and do this. But, I'll say this, like to like last thing about VAs is, so I'm sure a lot of people have listened to the 4-Hour Work Week. You listen to that book and you're just like, man, I suck at life. Like I'm just not like I need to automate my life and all this stuff and take the pressure off, right? Like we are all in different seasons and phases in life, and we all come from different circumstances. I think that's a cool goal to have, but like to truly, get a business to where it's like, it doesn't completely need you. That takes a long time, and so to like, not that you can't desire that goal if that's part of what you want to do in life, but like, just, I used to be so pressured and put pressure on myself to be like, outsource. And there are times in your business where you should not outsource. Like you don't have the capital, don't do it. Just keep grinding it out and rolling your capital in and just like stay tight on expenses. So my advice is like to really just stop and consider, do I really need the VA? VAs are sexy. They're cool to talk about. They're, all this fun stuff, and they are very purposeful at a certain time and place in your business, right? So if you only have $1,000 for wholesale product, you should keep grinding it out. If you've got $100,000 for wholesale product, you probably can have somebody look at a list for you.
Yeah, 100%. And I think a thing that doesn't get talked about enough is the fact that if you don't actually know what you're doing, you can't train a VA to do it. I'm sorry. It's not how that works.
Absolutely.
Especially when you're in the early days, like the first 6 months, I really don't think you should outsource anything. You need to intimately understand what you're doing and build those like SOPs and processes and things like that, because whenever you go to hand them over, you understand how long it should take and you understand where the pitfalls are, and you've already optimized them, because let's face it, none of us have enough time in a day anyways. And so you make it as efficient as possible. But, to me, a VA or any employee is really an efficiency tool first and foremost. So if you give somebody an ineffective process, does it really equate to much? I don't think so. Right. But yeah, I mean, it is super sexy.
Or if you expect them to build the process for you.
Yeah, right. Not going to happen.
It's just not going to happen. No. And, I'm the type of person that I will do the same task 100 times. And I'm like, why don't I have somebody doing this for me?
I'm the same way.
And, or why don't I, instead of doing the task, take a day or half a day and write out the procedure. slowly go through the task and write it out. And that's such a mindset thing, man, where it's just like, I could do the task in an hour, or I could take 5 hours and write it out step by step. It's like, oh, but that's 4 hours of time. Like I
And
can't
it feels
do
like
that.
you're not doing work. But what's crazy is like that's your most valuable work. Let's be honest. Creating those SOPs, even if it's just for you, when you can sit down and run through a checklist really quick, have things like risk mitigation built into your sourcing. All these things mean repeatability and scalability, even if it's just you. I mean, like make SOPs just for yourself. I mean, but to get back to it, like it is sexy. Like we just hired a VA in the Philippines with a bachelor's degree for $6 to $7 an hour. That's ridiculous. Like I could imagine like having a bachelor's degree and doing that. And again, we talked about, the differences in cultures, lifestyle, all that stuff, right? But none of that matters if you can't retain that person. And this is where I argue that just starting a business and immediately outsourcing everything does not work. I've yet to see a situation where it truly does, because like, yeah, you can get it outsourced, but your churn rate for employees is going to be super high. So you end up still working the same amount of hours. So if you approach it right and you understand, and if you understand you are, again, hiring a real person and you approach it like you would be hiring an employee, I think that can change the game, right? Be willing to pay a few bucks more. I mean, what's the difference really to your budget? $7 versus $5. But to the VA,
Right. Well, and for the other option is, well, if you don't want to work with international workers, then your other option is domestic. Minimum, $10 an hour or $12 an hour or whatever it's going to be. And we know, like in that quality, like good. So $7 an hour Philippines is probably $20 an hour US for the same caliber of individual, And so there's all types of nuances there,
there really is. Like, hiring's hard. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
It's just hard.
Yeah. And if you get burned, it's even harder, because then you're basing all of your next experiences off of, well, I got burned here and I got burned there, and I'm just not going to work with anybody. And it's
Then you never grow, right? I mean, I think this is where a lot of people get stuck, regardless of what it is like you quote unquote failed at one thing, whether that was placing your first restock order, whatever, and you're like, I'm never going to do it again. It's like, no, just learn and like make the process better. Before we leave, I have a huge ask. If you enjoyed this podcast and you got value from it, leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. The way we're able to have more impact on more sellers is by getting in front of them. We can do that by having more reviews and getting pushed to the top of iTunes podcast. So leave us a review and let us know what you think of the podcast.